I'm Rebecca Anderson, 34 years old, and I never imagined I'd be standing in front of my own home like a stranger. 7 beautiful years with Michael ended with a brain aneurysm that took him at 36. While still wearing my funeral clothes, I discovered my key no longer worked, and inside, my mother-in-law Vivian was unpacking boxes. "You're just a wife without a will. This house belongs to family now," she sneered. I stared at her in silence, then smiled. If you've ever felt betrayed by family, please hit subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Trust me, you'll want to see how this ends. Michael and I met during our graduate program in architecture at Cornell University, both of us drawn to the preservation of historic homes and the stories they held within their walls. I still remember the first time I saw him, sketching a Victorian facade in the university library, his brow furrowed in concentration as he worked out the precise details of an ornate cornice. Our connection was immediate and passionate, built on a shared vision of creating spaces that honored the past while embracing the future. We dated for 18 months before Michael proposed on a crisp autumn evening in the garden of a historic estate we'd been studying. Despite his family's subtle reservations about our relationship, we married in a small ceremony attended by close friends and family, though I couldn't help but notice the tight smile on Vivian's face as she watched us exchange vows. By that time, I had established myself as an interior designer with a growing reputation for blending contemporary functionality with classic elements, while Michael was making waves at a prestigious architectural firm specializing in historic renovations. Together, we saved enough for a substantial down payment on a neglected Victorian home that had captivated us both from the moment we saw it listed. That house became our shared dream, our largest canvas, and ultimately, the battlefield I never anticipated. I contributed exactly half of the $80,000 down payment from my own savings, a fact that seemed to irritate Vivian whenever it came up in conversation. "Such an unusual arrangement," she would comment with a thin smile, "at family gatherings. In my day, the husband provided the home." What she deliberately overlooked was that beyond the down payment, I poured thousands of hours and nearly $60,000 of my personal earnings into renovating that house, documenting every receipt and transformation meticulously in what would later prove to be a critical decision. Michael's brother, Andrew, visited rarely, but when he did, his envy was palpable. With 3 failed business ventures behind him and constant financial support from his parents, Andrew seemed to resent our stability and success. "Must be nice having everything handed to you," he once muttered after too many drinks at Thanksgiving. Though nothing had been handed to either of us. We had worked through graduate school, built our careers through talent and persistence, and saved for years to afford our home. Grace, Andrew's wife, was polite but distant, always watching Vivian for cues on how to behave toward me. Life was following our carefully drawn plans until Michael began experiencing headaches that would not subside. Initially, we attributed them to work stress and the extensive renovation project we were undertaking on the 3rd floor of our home. When over-the-counter medications failed to provide relief, I insisted he see a doctor, never imagining the diagnosis that would shatter our world. The neurologist identified an arteriovenous malformation, a tangle of abnormal blood vessels in his brain that had likely been present since birth. Like a ticking time bomb, it had waited silently until that moment to make its presence known. Surgery was scheduled, but 3 days before the procedure, while reviewing renovation plans in our kitchen, Michael collapsed. The aneurysm had ruptured, sending him into a coma from which doctors warned he might never wake. For 23 days, I lived in the hospital, sleeping in an uncomfortable chair beside his bed, speaking to him constantly about our home, our plans, our future, clinging to hope despite the increasingly somber expressions of the medical staff. Vivian and Richard, Michael's father, visited daily but maintained a strange formality with me, as though we were merely acquaintances sharing a waiting room rather than family united in grief and hope. When Michael briefly regained consciousness, on the 24th day, his words were slurred but urgent. "Make sure you're protected," he whispered, squeezing my hand with surprising strength. "Everything's yours. Don't let them," before drifting back into unconsciousness. Those were the last words he spoke to me. The following morning, his condition deteriorated rapidly, and by afternoon, despite the medical team's frantic efforts, I watched the monitors flatline, signaling the end of the life we had built together, the future we had planned dissolving in the sterile hospital air. The following days passed in a blur of funeral arrangements, paperwork, and a grief so profound, it felt physical. I moved through the necessary tasks on autopilot, barely registering the whispered conversations between Vivian and Andrew that halted when I approached, or the way Richard avoided making eye contact during the funeral planning. Exhaustion overwhelmed me as I drove home from the funeral home, having finalized the service details, looking forward to a few hours of solitude in the home Michael and I had loved, never suspecting that the worst betrayal was yet to come. I'll never forget the moment my key failed to turn in our front door lock. At first, I thought it was simple fatigue causing me to fumble, but after several attempts, the truth became undeniable. Someone had changed the locks on my home less than 48 hours after Michael's death. Before I could process this, the door swung open to reveal Vivian, her expression cold and triumphant as she blocked the entrance. "Rebecca," she said, my name sounding like an accusation on her lips. "We've been expecting you." Behind her, I glimpsed Andrew and Grace in Michael's office, methodically sorting through his architectural drawings and awards, placing them in cardboard boxes labeled Anderson Family Property. The reality of what was happening hit me like a physical blow. "What are you doing?" I managed to ask, my voice barely audible as shock constricted my throat. Vivian straightened her spine, her chin lifting in that imperious way that had always signaled conflict during family gatherings. "This house belongs to the Anderson family now," she announced, as though reciting a fact as indisputable as gravity. "Michael is gone, and you're no longer welcome here." Andrew appeared in the hallway, holding a document that he thrust toward me. "This is Michael's will," he stated, watching my reaction closely. "Made before your marriage. It leaves everything to his family." The paper trembled in my hands as I quickly scanned it, noting the date from 9 years ago, well before our relationship had even begun. "This isn't valid," I protested, my designer's eye noticing immediately that several pages appeared to be missing. "We bought this house together. My name is on the deed. We updated our wills after—" "If there's an updated will, where is it?" Vivian interrupted, her voice dripping with skepticism. "Convenient that no one has seen this supposed new document." Andrew stepped closer, his expression a mixture of rehearsed sympathy and poorly concealed satisfaction. "Look, Rebecca, we all know the truth. You married into money and position. Michael was successful. You were struggling. Now that he's gone, the gravy train ends." The accusation was so wildly inaccurate, so contrary to the financial reality of our partnership, that I couldn't immediately formulate a response. Before I could gather my thoughts, Vivian twisted the knife deeper. "If you'd given him children, perhaps things would be different," she said, each word calculated to inflict maximum pain. "But you didn't even provide the family with heirs. What purpose did you serve, exactly?" Through the open door, I noticed our neighbor, Mrs. Calloway, slowing her walk, openly watching the confrontation unfolding on our porch. The humiliation burned as hot as my grief. "You have 1 hour to collect some clothes," Vivian continued, consulting her watch as though timing a minor inconvenience. "1 suitcase, nothing more. The rest will be inventoried as family property." "This is my home," I said, finding my voice at last. "You have no right." "I have every right as Michael's mother," Vivian cut in. "And if you're not gone in 1 hour, I'll call the police and have you removed for trespassing." The word trespassing echoed in my mind as I mechanically moved through my bedroom, grabbing essentials while Grace watched from the doorway, presumably to ensure I didn't take anything Vivian had deemed Anderson property. My wedding album disappeared from my hands as Andrew declared it family history. The quilt Michael's grandmother had given us as a wedding present was ripped from the bed and carried away by Vivian herself. In a daze, I filled 1 suitcase with clothes, basic toiletries, and the few framed photos I managed to secure before Vivian objected. The professional certificates I'd earned, my design portfolios, even my laptop containing years of work, all remained in the house as I was ushered out the door exactly 57 minutes after arriving home. That night, I slept in my car in a shopping center parking lot, unable to process the magnitude of what had happened, alternating between sobbing and staring blankly at the ceiling. By morning, the shock had begun to give way to a hollow feeling of absolute abandonment. Not only had I lost my husband, but I had also lost my home, my possessions, and apparently my status as a person deserving of basic dignity, all within the space of 3 days. As dawn broke over the windshield, I realized I was experiencing homelessness for the first time in my life, with only a suitcase of clothes and less than $2,000 in my personal checking account to my name. When the morning light became too harsh to ignore, I called Olivia, my best friend since college and the maid of honor at our wedding. Her immediate response, "I'm coming to get you right now. Text me your location," was the first moment of human kindness I'd experienced since Michael collapsed in our kitchen. Within 30 minutes, she arrived, took one look at my disheveled state, and enveloped me in a hug that finally broke the numbness encasing me. "You're staying with me," she said, brooking no argument as she loaded my solitary suitcase into her trunk. "Then we're getting you a lawyer." Olivia's one-bedroom apartment became my refuge, her couch my new bed, as we navigated the bewildering aftermath of both grief and displacement. The following day, she accompanied me to the local legal aid office, where an overworked attorney, named Justin, listened to my story with increasing concern between glances at his overflowing case files. "Without a current will, things get complicated," he explained, rubbing his eyes tiredly. "If you're both on the deed as joint tenants with right of survivorship, the house should automatically pass to you. But if it's tenants in common, or if only Michael's name is on the deed." He trailed off, and the sinking feeling in my stomach intensified. "I need to see the deed, any mortgage documents, and proof of financial contributions," he continued. "Do you have copies of those?" I didn't. Everything, every important document, every record, every piece of evidence of our shared life and financial partnership remained in the house now controlled by Vivian. When I attempted to access our joint checking account to withdraw emergency funds, I discovered it had been frozen pending estate resolution. The bank representative informed me apologetically that I would need a death certificate and probate documents to access the funds, documents that were either still being processed or, in the case of probate paperwork, would require legal intervention I couldn't yet afford. The day after meeting with Justin, I returned to our house, hoping to at least retrieve my medication and some important personal documents. Andrew answered the door, blocking the entrance with his body. "You need to stop harassing us," he said loudly, clearly performing for any neighbors who might be watching. "We've already explained that you have no right to be here." When I asked specifically for my blood pressure medication on the bathroom counter, he smirked. "Guess you should have packed better. Maybe next time you'll think twice before trying to gold dig your way into a family." He closed the door in my face before I could respond. That evening, scrolling through social media seeking distraction, I discovered Grace had posted photos of herself and Vivian, organizing family treasures, in what was unmistakably my home office. The caption referred to "Reclaiming Anderson Family History," and made pointed references to those who passed through our lives temporarily. Several mutual acquaintances had liked the post. My exclusion from the Anderson family was being publicly cemented, my marriage of 7 years reduced to a temporary intrusion in their narrative. Through a former colleague, I learned Vivian had begun telling our social circle that I wasn't family material and had trapped Michael into marriage, purposefully constructing a narrative that painted me as an opportunistic outsider rather than a grieving widow. My work performance at the design firm suffered dramatically as concentration became impossible. Projects that once energized me now sat unfinished on my tablet, deadlines approaching with alarming speed. My boss, Marco, called me into his office after I missed an important client presentation. "Rebecca, I understand you're going through hell right now," he said, compassion warring with professional concern on his face. "But we have commitments to clients. If you need leave, we should discuss it formally." The thought of unpaid leave terrified me given my financial precarity, but my work quality had deteriorated so significantly that I recognized the reality of my situation. Night terrors became my constant companion, vivid dreams where I relived Michael's collapse. Except, in these nightmares, Vivian stood watching with satisfaction as he fell, sometimes even pushing him herself. I would wake, gasping on Olivia's couch, sweating and disoriented, grief and betrayal tangled so completely that I could no longer separate the emotions. My savings dwindled rapidly as I paid for new medications, basic necessities, and consultations, with attorneys who demanded retainers I couldn't possibly afford. Apartment hunting revealed that without proof of current employment, my job now in jeopardy, and with no rental history in my name for the past 7 years, having been a homeowner, securing even a studio apartment would be nearly impossible without a substantial deposit and cosigner. While waiting in line at a local coffee shop, I overheard 2 women discussing that poor Anderson boy who died and his wife who got nothing because she wasn't really family. The casual cruelty of the gossip, clearly originating from Vivian's calculated campaign, sent me rushing to the restroom to vomit, another public humiliation to add to the growing collection. Each day brought new evidence of how thoroughly I was being erased from Michael's life and legacy, how effectively Vivian was rewriting our history while I struggled simply to function through grief and shock. 3 weeks after Michael's funeral, Olivia reluctantly showed me the social media posts revealing that Vivian had hosted a proper family memorial at our house. Photos showed dozens of guests in our living room, standing beneath the chandelier. Michael and I had installed together, drinking from crystal glasses we had received as wedding gifts. Most painful was the sight of the fireplace mantle, stripped of our wedding photos and travel mementos, now displaying Anderson family photos in which I was conspicuously absent. In one image, Vivian stood in the kitchen I had designed, serving food on the artisan plates I had collected, while a banner reading, "Remembering Our Michael," hung on the wall. Our home had been literally redecorated to erase my existence within 21 days of his death. The violation felt physical, as though his family had not only stolen my shelter, but were systematically destroying the evidence that we had ever been partners in creating that space. Through a mutual friend who attended the event out of morbid curiosity, I learned that Vivian had told guests I was too unstable to participate in the memorial, further cementing the narrative that I was somehow separate from Michael's real family and life. Later that same week, I discovered through an online listing that Andrew was selling Michael's collection of vintage cars, including the 1967 Mustang we had restored together as our first major joint project. The cars had been stored in a detached garage on our property, and while I had no particular attachment to most of them, the Mustang represented countless weekends of shared labor, frustration, and triumph. Seeing it advertised with the caption, "Estate Sale, Classic Cars from the Anderson Collection," felt like watching another piece of our history being auctioned off without acknowledgement that these had been our shared possessions. The legal system, which I had naively believed would quickly recognize and correct such an obvious injustice, moved with glacial slowness. Justin from Legal Aid connected me with a probate attorney who reviewed my case and sent a formal letter, demanding the Anderson family cease disposal of assets pending legal resolution. In response, I received a certified letter from the Andersons' attorney characterizing me as a disgruntled former daughter-in-law attempting to claim family heirlooms, and demanding I surrender Michael's great-grandmother's wedding ring, which I had worn since our marriage. The letter further claimed that Ms. Winters, my maiden name, deliberately used to emphasize my outsider status, was harassing the grieving Anderson family during their time of mourning. The cognitive dissonance of being portrayed as the aggressor while being systematically stripped of home, possessions, and dignity took a physical toll. I developed persistent insomnia, losing nearly 12 pounds in 3 weeks as my appetite disappeared completely. Dark circles became permanent features. Beneath my eyes, my clothes hanging loosely on my diminished frame. Marco regretfully placed me on unpaid leave after I misinterpreted client instructions on a major project, potentially costing the firm a valuable contract. "Take the time you need to sort out your personal situation," he said kindly but firmly. "Your position will be here when you're ready to return." Without income, my financial situation became dire. Friends from our shared social circle began choosing sides, some avoiding me entirely to prevent alienating the influential Anderson family, while others admitted they didn't know what to believe amid the conflicting narratives. Even relationships with steadfast supporters like Olivia became strained by my extended presence in her small apartment. "Stay as long as you need," she insisted, though I couldn't miss her relief when leaving for weekend trips to her boyfriend's place. Desperate for income, I interviewed for retail positions, attempting to explain my situation to skeptical managers who clearly found it suspicious that a supposedly successful interior designer was applying for minimum wage work with no recent references. At a grocery store 3 miles from our neighborhood, I turned down an aisle and came face to face with the specialty pasta Michael and I had purchased monthly for our tradition of homemade Sunday dinners. The sight of the familiar packaging triggered such an intense panic attack that I abandoned my cart mid-store, gasping for breath in the parking lot as bewildered shoppers gave me a wide berth. Perhaps most painful was discovering through social media that Michael's workshop tools, the carefully collected instruments he had used to restore architectural details in our home, were being sold piece by piece through online marketplaces. Each listing felt like watching his hands, his skills, his passions being dispersed without ceremony or respect. That same week, a local community newsletter published a brief interview with Vivian about her work, preserving the Anderson family legacy, including her plans to eventually sell the family home once she had properly sorted through our son's belongings. No mention was made of my contributions to that home or my status as Michael's wife of 7 years. My parents, living abroad for a long-term work assignment, offered emotional support through daily video calls, but could provide little practical assistance from 6,000 miles away. During one particularly desperate evening, I visited Michael's grave alone, only to discover that a headstone had already been installed without my knowledge or input. The inscription read simply, "Michael James Anderson, beloved son and brother," with no acknowledgement of his role as a husband. Standing before that stone in the fading light, I reached the darkest moment of my journey, questioning whether continuing the fight against his family was worth the emotional devastation it caused daily. For a brief, frightening moment, I understood how people could surrender to despair when facing systematic erasure of their existence and worth. Sitting on the damp grass beside his partial memorial, I whispered to Michael, asking for a sign that I should continue, some indication that fighting for our shared life and home wasn't merely prolonging my own suffering. The turning point came unexpectedly the following evening as I sorted through the meager possessions I'd managed to take from our home. Among them was a framed photo of Michael and me on our honeymoon in Santorini, one of the few personal items I'd grabbed during my supervised packing. As I held it, remembering the perfect Mediterranean light on that day, the frame slipped from my hands and shattered on Olivia's hardwood floor. While collecting the broken pieces, I noticed something unusual taped to the back of the photo, a small key with a numbered tag I didn't recognize. Immediately, Michael's last coherent words echoed in my mind. "Make sure you're protected. Everything's yours." Had he hidden something for me to find? The discovery energized me, providing the first glimmer of hope I'd felt since the locks were changed on our home. The key tag contained a series of numbers that didn't immediately make sense until I remembered Michael's methodical record-keeping system. He documented everything with dates. Our first meeting, so 4/12/15, our wedding, so 7/22/17, the day we closed on our house, 11/09/18. This number sequence matched none of those personal milestones, but when I rearranged the digits into a standard date format, I recognized it instantly. The date of our first apartment lease signing before we bought our house. Following this instinct, I searched online for storage facilities near that first apartment and discovered one with a numbering system matching the tag. Early the next morning, I took 3 buses across town to reach the facility, heart racing as I approached the office. "I need to access Unit 328, I told the manager, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes who studied me carefully. "It might be under Michael Anderson. I have the key." She checked her computer, frowning slightly. "That unit is paid up for another 2 years, she confirmed. "Automatic payments from an account under Michael J. Anderson. Are you Rebecca?" Her question caught me off guard. "Yes, how did you—" "He listed you as the only authorized person besides himself," she explained, sliding a clipboard toward me. "I'll need to see ID, and you'll need to sign here." Minutes later, I stood before a small storage unit, my hands trembling as I fitted the key into the padlock. Inside sat a single fireproof lockbox and a sealed plastic container. The lockbox opened with Michael's birth date, revealing a carefully organized collection of documents that took my breath away. Our house deed, clearly showing both our names as joint tenants with right of survivorship. Bank statements documenting my substantial contributions to the mortgage and renovation costs. Life insurance policies listing me as the sole beneficiary. And most surprisingly, a USB drive labeled "Watch Me, Becca." The plastic container held duplicate copies of our most important household documents, backup drives of Michael's work computer, and a letter addressed to me in his handwriting. With shaking hands, I opened the envelope, tears blurring my vision as I recognized his architectural block lettering. "Rebecca," it began. "If you're reading this, something has happened to me, and my family is behaving exactly as I feared they might." The letter continued, explaining that while we had consulted with an estate attorney about updating his will, his sudden health crisis had occurred before the new documents could be finalized. Anticipating potential problems based on past family dynamics, he had created this backup plan, documenting our financial partnership and his explicit wishes for all our shared assets. "Everything we built together belongs to you," he wrote. "Don't let my mother convince you otherwise. The house, the investments, my half of the business, it's all yours by right. I've included everything you'll need to prove it." With the lockbox securely in my possession, I headed straight to a cafe with reliable Wi-Fi and plugged in the USB drive. The video that appeared showed Michael sitting in his home office, our home office, looking directly into the camera. "This is Michael James Anderson, recording on March 14th, 2024, he began, his voice steady as he stated the date just 3 months before his death. "I'm making this video to clearly state my wishes regarding my estate and to confirm that my wife, Rebecca Winters Anderson, is and should be the sole beneficiary of all my assets and possessions in the event of my death." For 23 minutes, he detailed our financial arrangements, referenced specific documents, and explicitly addressed his concerns about his family's attitudes toward me. "My mother has never accepted Rebecca as my true partner," he stated, bluntly. This recording ensures there can be no confusion about my intentions, regardless of the status of formal legal documents. The USB also contained scans of emails between Michael and the estate attorney, showing appointments scheduled for updating his will, along with draft documents clearly indicating his desire for me to inherit everything. There were also journal entries dating back years, documenting Vivian's controlling behavior and attempts to interfere in our marriage. Perhaps most damning were detailed spreadsheets tracking my financial contributions to our home, including mortgage payments and renovation expenses, with attached receipts and bank statements. As I reviewed document after document, the fog of helplessness that had enveloped me since Michael's death began to lift. He hadn't left me unprotected after all. He had created an irrefutable record of our partnership and his intentions. Even without a formally updated will, the joint tenancy deed alone should have prevented Vivian from taking our home. With renewed purpose, I gathered every document, made digital copies to multiple secure locations, and prepared to reclaim what was rightfully mine. The morning after discovering Michael's storage unit, I called Catherine Reynolds, an attorney specializing in estate disputes whose name I'd found in Michael's notes. Unlike the overworked legal aid lawyer, Catherine immediately grasped the strength of my position after reviewing the documents. "Mrs. Anderson," she said, her voice reflecting a confidence I hadn't heard from any professional in weeks. "What your in-laws have done constitutes not just a moral failing, but potentially criminal behavior. The joint tenancy deed alone makes their actions legally indefensible." Catherine took my case on contingency, recognizing that the evidence supported a straightforward claim despite my current financial limitations. "We'll need affidavits from people who can verify your contributions to the property," she advised, helping me create a comprehensive list of potential witnesses and evidence. "And we should connect with Michael's business partner to ensure they aren't attempting to claim ownership of his share of the firm." That afternoon, I contacted David Mercer, who had co-founded the architectural practice with Michael 8 years earlier. His response was immediate and vehement. "Rebecca, I've been trying to reach you for weeks," he exclaimed, sounding genuinely distressed. "Vivian showed up at the office 2 days after the funeral, claiming she was entitled to Michael's equity in the firm. I told her our partnership agreement explicitly transfers ownership to the surviving spouse, but she threatened litigation." David's revelation that Vivian had already attempted to seize Michael's business interests confirmed her pattern of appropriating everything connected to her son. "I never believed for a second that you and Michael hadn't made arrangements," David continued. "He was too methodical, too responsible to leave things unsettled." Over the next week, I reconnected with contractors who had worked on our home renovation, many of whom remembered me as an active participant in the project. You were more hands-on than most homeowners, confirmed Elena, the master carpenter who had restored our staircase. I specifically remember you paying me directly from your personal account for the custom newel posts. Elena and 5 other contractors agreed to provide affidavits detailing my financial and practical contributions to the home improvements. Catherine assembled a comprehensive financial record proving my payments toward the mortgage, property, taxes, and home insurance from my separate design firm earnings. She also secured statements from our homeowners association confirming my active role in community governance, further establishing my status as a true co-owner rather than merely Michael's wife. Our neighbors, the Callaways, who had witnessed my humiliating eviction, contacted me through a mutual friend offering to provide statements about what they had observed. We watched you and Michael build that house into a home for years, Mrs. Callaway said when we met at a cafe far from our neighborhood. What his mother is doing is shameful, and we won't stand by silently. Michael's primary physician, Dr. Levinson, provided a statement confirming my role as his devoted caregiver during his illness, directly contradicting Vivian's narrative that I had been a distant, uninvolved spouse. Through careful research, Catherine identified multiple legal grounds for our case: my clear survivorship rights as joint tenant on the deed, my substantial contributions creating an equity interest even if the deed were contested, the implication of undue influence in any claim based on Michael's outdated will, and potential civil claims for conversion of personal property, wrongful eviction, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We'll start with an emergency injunction to prevent further disposal of assets, Catherine explained as we prepared our filing. Then a temporary restraining order against the family to prevent them from entering the property or removing additional items. While the legal strategy took shape, I finally began attending grief counseling sessions, recognizing that my trauma was compound. Not just the loss of Michael, but the violent severing of my connection to our shared home and possessions. You're experiencing complicated grief exacerbated by secondary trauma, my therapist explained. The normal grieving process has been interrupted by an acute crisis that prevents closure. Through therapy, I began separating my grief for Michael from my anger toward his family, allowing myself to mourn him properly while still fighting for our shared legacy. Using photographs of our home interior from insurance documentation and social media, I created a detailed inventory of my personal and professional possessions that remained in the house, assigning approximate values for potential restitution claims. Catherine added this to our growing file of evidence. Meanwhile, I reached out to Michael's college friends, many of whom had drifted from his life after Vivian made clear her disapproval of their unsettling influence. Several responded with supportive messages and offers to testify about our relationship and Michael's frequently expressed frustration with his mother's controlling behavior. With Catherine's guidance, I created a comprehensive timeline of events following Michael's death, documenting each interaction with his family, each discovered sale of our joint property, and each public statement they had made about me. This chronology revealed the systematic nature of their campaign to disinherit and discredit me, transforming what might have seemed like isolated incidents into clear evidence of a coordinated effort to deprive me of my legal rights. As our case solidified, Catherine prepared me for the public nature of our legal battle. The Andersons have been creating their narrative unopposed for weeks, she noted. When we file these motions, expect them to escalate their attacks on your character. We need to be ready with clear, factual responses that focus on the legal issues rather than emotion. Despite her warning, I felt stronger than I had since Michael's collapse, empowered by purpose and the knowledge that I was fighting not just for material possessions, but for the recognition of our partnership and the life we had built together. Michael trusted me to protect what we created, I told Catherine as we finalized our initial filings. I won't let him down. The sheriff delivered our legal papers to the Anderson family on a Tuesday morning, exactly 43 days after Michael's death. Catherine had warned me not to be present to avoid potential confrontation, but Mrs. Callaway texted me a play-by-play as Vivian received the thick envelope of documents on our front porch. She turned white, then red, my neighbor reported. She's been on the phone nonstop since the sheriff left. Our initial hearing was scheduled for the following Monday, giving the Andersons' attorney minimal time to prepare a response to our comprehensive filing. Catherine and I arrived at the courthouse to find Vivian, Richard, Andrew, and Grace already seated in the front row, their expressions ranging from Andrew's visible nervousness to Vivian's rigid indignation. Their attorney, a silver-haired man, named James Whitfield, exuded confidence as he nodded dismissively in our direction. "Don't worry about the theatrics," Catherine murmured as we took our seats. "Whitfield specializes in representing wealthy families in inheritance disputes, but he's used to intimidating under-resourced claimants. We're fully prepared." Judge Harriet Monroe, a veteran of the probate court with a reputation for no-nonsense efficiency, reviewed our filings silently before looking up at both legal teams. "This case appears straightforward despite the voluminous filings," she stated, fixing Whitfield with a pointed stare. "Joint tenancy with right of survivorship is black-letter law, Mr. Whitfield. What exactly is your client's position regarding the property deed?" Whitfield launched into a convoluted argument about Michael's true intentions, as evidenced by his earlier will, claiming I had coerced him into adding my name to the deed during our marriage. When Judge Monroe asked for evidence of coercion, Whitfield faltered visibly. "We have statements from family members regarding the deceased's expressions of concern about his wife's financial motivations," he offered weakly. Catherine pounced immediately, presenting Michael's video statement, bank records showing my substantial financial contributions, and affidavits from neutral third parties including contractors, neighbors, and Michael's business partner. As each piece of evidence was introduced, Vivian's expression hardened, while beside her, Andrew began whispering urgently to their attorney. The turning point came when Catherine played a segment of Michael's video directly addressing his mother's behavior. "My mother has repeatedly attempted to control my personal and professional decisions, including pressuring me to exclude Rebecca from family financial discussions. Let me be absolutely clear. Rebecca and I are equal partners in all aspects of our life together, including our home and financial affairs." Vivian gasped audibly as her son's voice filled the courtroom, his posthumous testimony devastating her. Narrative. Judge Monroe listened to arguments for less than 2 hours before issuing her preliminary ruling. "Based on the clear evidence before this court, I am granting temporary exclusive possession of the property to Rebecca Anderson as the surviving joint tenant," she announced. "Furthermore, I am issuing a temporary restraining order preventing the Anderson family from entering the property or disposing of any additional assets until ownership of personal property can be properly determined." She fixed Vivian with a stern gaze. "Mrs. Anderson Sr., this court takes a very dim view of self-help evictions under any circumstances, but particularly against a recent widow. Your actions appear both legally and morally indefensible based on the evidence presented today." As the judge spoke, Vivian's face contorted with rage. The moment Judge Monroe called for a 15-minute recess before addressing additional motions, Vivian stood and pointed at me from across the courtroom. "You manipulated him from the beginning," she shouted, her voice echoing against the wood-paneled walls. "You were never worthy of the Anderson name." Court officers stepped forward immediately, but the damage to her credibility was already done. Catherine squeezed my arm supportively as Whitfield hurriedly escorted his client from the courtroom, her public outburst undermining any portrayal of her as a reasonable, grieving mother. That afternoon, accompanied by a court-appointed escort and locksmith, I returned to our home for the first time in over 6 weeks. Stepping across the threshold with my new key, I was shocked by the extent of the changes. Family photos had been rehung, furniture rearranged, and walls repainted in colors Vivian had always preferred. More disturbing were the gaps where valuable items had clearly been removed, empty spaces on bookshelves, hooks where artwork had hung, and bare spots where electronics had stood. Catherine had anticipated this and brought a professional inventory specialist who photographed each room systematically, documenting the alterations and missing items. "They've been busy," the specialist noted grimly as we moved through the house. "I'm seeing evidence of at least $70,000 to $80,000 in removed property based on your original inventory list." In the kitchen, I found evidence that Vivian had actually been living in the house. Her personal food items in the refrigerator, her clothing in the guest room closet, her toiletries arranged in the master bathroom I had shared with Michael. The level of appropriation was stunning, as though she had been systematically replacing me in every corner of the home. When confronted with the evidence of missing items at our follow-up hearing, Vivian claimed they were Anderson family heirlooms that had merely been safeguarded during the dispute. Judge Monroe ordered a full accounting of all removed property within 48 hours, with significant penalties for noncompliance. After that hearing, Grace approached me in the courthouse hallway while Vivian was engaged with their attorney. "Rebecca," she said hesitantly, glancing over her shoulder, "I need to talk to you privately." Later that day, over coffee at a discreet location, Grace revealed the extent of Vivian's methodical campaign. "She started planning this the day Michael was hospitalized," Grace admitted, tears streaming down her face. "She told Andrew and Richard that you would try to take Anderson family property and that they needed to protect Michael's legacy from you." According to Grace, Vivian had already consulted with Whitfield before Michael died, strategizing how to challenge any inheritance claims I might make. "She has a storage unit full of things from your house," Grace confessed. "Artwork, electronics, jewelry, anything she thought was valuable. She's been giving family pieces to relatives, telling them they need to rescue Anderson heirlooms before you could sell them." The day after Grace's confession, I began receiving anonymous messages from members of Vivian's church group, calling me a gold digger and family destroyer. Catherine immediately documented these communications as evidence of ongoing harassment. Meanwhile, the local newspaper published a detailed article about the case, interviewing several sources, including David, who spoke passionately about Michael's dedication to our marriage and his frustration with his mother's interference. As public opinion began shifting, several of Michael's former clients contacted me with supportive messages and stories about how proudly he had spoken of our partnership. Vivian's desperation became evident when she attempted to claim in a subsequent filing that Michael had been mentally compromised for months before his death, suggesting his video statement and joint tenancy arrangement reflected diminished capacity. Catherine immediately countered with Michael's medical records and professional accomplishments during the period in question, including complex architectural projects and publications that clearly demonstrated his mental acuity. During Vivian's deposition, Catherine methodically exposed contradictions in her testimony, particularly regarding her knowledge of our financial arrangements. "Mrs. Anderson, you testified earlier that you believed your son was the sole financial contributor to the household, correct?" Catherine asked. "Yes, Michael provided everything for that home," Vivian insisted. "Were you aware that Rebecca Anderson contributed 50% of the down payment from her separate funds?" Catherine asked, sliding bank statements across the table. "Or that she paid for the entire kitchen renovation from her design firm earnings?" Vivian's composure cracked as Catherine presented document after document contradicting her claims. Most damaging was evidence Catherine had uncovered through discovery. Emails from Vivian to Michael dating back 5 years, repeatedly suggesting, "He divorced me and find a proper Anderson wife who would prioritize family over career." Through a neighbor's security camera footage that happened to capture part of our driveway, we discovered visual evidence of Andrew and Richard removing artwork and electronics from our home late at night during the first week after they had changed the locks. The timestamp clearly showed them loading Michael's valuable original architectural prints into Richard's SUV at 2:17 in the morning, hardly the actions of people who believed they were legally entitled to those possessions. As our case strengthened daily, I found unexpected confidence in standing up to the family that had tried to erase me. During a chance encounter with Andrew at the courthouse, I maintained eye contact as he attempted to intimidate me with his physical presence. "You won't win against us," he muttered as we waited for an elevator. "The Andersons take care of their own." "Michael was taking care of his own," I replied steadily. "His choice was me." The flash of uncertainty in Andrew's eyes told me he was beginning to recognize the inevitability of their defeat. The final piece fell into place when Catherine received an anonymous tip about a second storage unit rented in Richard's name. With a court order, we discovered the unit contained much of my personal property, my design portfolios, professional awards, clothing, and even personal items like my grandmother's quilt and childhood photo albums, things with significant emotional, but limited financial value, taken purely to hurt me rather than for any material gain. After 3 exhausting months of legal proceedings, Judge Monroe issued her final ruling in a 37-page decision that vindicated my position on every significant point. This court finds that Rebecca Anderson is the rightful owner of the property at 78 Maple Street by virtue of joint tenancy with right of survivorship, she wrote. Furthermore, The court finds that Vivian, Richard, and Andrew Anderson engaged in a deliberate and unconscionable campaign to deprive Mrs. Anderson of her legal property rights during a period of bereavement. The judge's language became particularly pointed when addressing the family's conduct. The defendant's actions in changing locks, removing personal property, and attempting to assert ownership through self-help methods rather than legal procedures represents a shocking disregard for both property law and basic human decency. Their subsequent attempts to justify these actions through unsubstantiated claims about the deceased's intentions are contradicted by substantial documentary evidence and appear designed primarily to retroactively legitimize their improper conduct. Beyond confirming my ownership of our home, the ruling ordered a comprehensive inventory and return of all removed personal property, with monetary damages assessed for any items that could not be recovered. The court appointed a special master to oversee this process, preventing the Andersons from further manipulating the situation. The judgment included substantial financial penalties: $37,000 for wrongful eviction, $45,000 for emotional distress, and an additional $62,000 for the value of missing property that the Andersons claimed they could not locate. Judge Monroe also took the unusual step of awarding full attorney's fees, citing the vexatious and unconscionable nature of the defendant's actions and legal positions. The week following the court's decision, my life insurance claim, which Vivian had unsuccessfully challenged, was finally processed, providing financial security that allowed me to focus on rebuilding rather than merely surviving. The bank that had frozen our joint accounts not only released the funds but also paid interest penalties for their failure to follow proper procedures for joint accounts with right of survivorship. Public sentiment, which Vivian had initially manipulated to isolate me, shifted dramatically as details of the case became known. Several community members who had believed her characterization of me approached with awkward but seemingly genuine apologies. "We should have known better than to listen to gossip," admitted Sarah, who had organized Michael's architecture firm's holiday parties for years. "You and Michael were always so obviously devoted to each other." With Olivia's help, I finally moved back into our home, though returning to the space filled with memories of Michael brought both comfort and fresh waves of grief. A professional assessment revealed the extent of damage caused during the Andersons' occupation: scratched hardwood floors from moving furniture, wine stains on carpets, and even deliberate damage to the custom cabinetry Michael had crafted for our kitchen. These physical wounds to our home seemed symbolic of the larger injuries inflicted on our shared legacy, yet they were, at least, reparable. The court-ordered return of property created a final confrontation with Vivian, who arrived at the house with a truck containing items the special master had identified as belonging to me. As she supervised the unloading, her expression remained stony, her posture rigid with resentment. When the workers finished, she approached me on the porch, a small wooden box in her hands. "These are the last of Michael's grandmother's jewelry pieces," she said, her voice stripped of its usual imperious tone. "The court says they belong to you now." As I accepted the box, meeting her gaze steadily, Vivian seemed to deflate slightly. "You've won," she acknowledged, the words clearly painful for her. "You've taken everything that mattered." "I haven't taken anything, Vivian," I replied quietly. "I'm simply keeping what Michael and I built together, what we always intended to share." She turned away without response, but there was something different in her bearing, not acceptance, perhaps, but recognition of the immutability of her defeat. The most surprising development came 2 weeks later when Andrew contacted me requesting a private meeting. In a neutral coffee shop downtown, he sat across from me with an unfamiliar hesitancy. "I need to apologize," he began awkwardly. I followed. Mom's lead because I always have. But watching this case unfold, seeing the evidence... He paused, struggling visibly. "Michael talked to me about updating his will last Christmas. He was explicit about wanting everything to go to you. I should have spoken up when Mom started claiming otherwise." While his admission came far too late to prevent months of suffering, it represented the first acknowledgement from any family member that their actions had been based on deliberate misrepresentation rather than genuine misunderstanding. Andrew also revealed that his marriage to Grace was ending, partly due to her discomfort with the family's behavior during the dispute. "She kept saying we crossed lines that decent people don't cross," he admitted. She was right. The community's support manifested in unexpected ways. Local businesses that had initially distanced themselves from me based on Vivian's narrative now made gestures of reconciliation. The owner of Michael's favorite bakery brought a basket of bread with a card reading, "Michael always spoke of you with such pride. We should have remembered that." Most moving was the weekend when Michael's close friends organized a restoration project for the areas of the house damaged during the Andersons' occupation. 12 people arrived with tools, materials, and determination to erase the physical evidence of that painful period. As they repaired scuffed floors, touched up paint, and replaced damaged fixtures, they shared stories about Michael, gradually transforming the work from an act of repair to a living memorial. During the cleanup, we discovered several hidden caches of photos and mementos that Vivian had attempted to destroy rather than return, tucked behind drawers, stuffed inside heating vents, and sealed in the backs of picture frames. Each recovery felt like reclaiming another fragment of our life together, pieces of our history rescued from deliberate erasure. Through the Special Master's investigation, we also traced several valuable items that Vivian had distributed to extended family members under the guise of preserving Anderson heirlooms. Most relatives, now aware of the court's findings, cooperatively returned these items, many expressing embarrassment at their unwitting participation in Vivian's scheme. The final symbolic act in reclaiming our home came when I hired a locksmith to change every lock using a new master key system that erased the possibility of any old keys functioning. As the locksmith worked, I walked through each room, removing the last traces of the Andersons' brief occupation and restoration space to reflect the home Michael and I had created together. Standing in our bedroom that evening, holding the new keys in my palm, I felt Michael's presence more strongly than at any time since his death. Not as a ghost, but as the embodiment of the life and home we had built through love, partnership, and mutual respect. For the first time since his collapse in our kitchen, I slept through the night without nightmares, finally secure in the knowledge that our shared legacy would endure. 1 year after Michael's death, I stood in the garden behind our home, watching the morning light filter through the Japanese maple trees we had planted together. The anniversary brought grief, of course, a grief that I now understood would always be part of me. But it also brought a sense of accomplishment and peace that had seemed impossible during those dark weeks when I slept on Olivia's couch, stripped of home and identity. The garden had become my most meaningful project, designed using sketches Michael had left in his portfolio labeled Future Garden Plans. Creating this space according to his vision while adding my own elements felt like a perfect metaphor for moving forward, honoring what we had shared while allowing new growth to emerge. My professional life had not merely recovered, but flourished. Marco had welcomed me back to the design firm with genuine relief, and my experiences had unexpectedly opened a new specialization in estate planning for couples, particularly focusing on protecting joint assets and creative legacy. This work brought not only financial security, but also the satisfaction of helping others avoid the nightmare I had endured. 3 months after the court's final ruling, I was offered a partnership that Michael would have celebrated enthusiastically. The settlement funds from the Anderson case went largely untouched, directed instead toward establishing the Michael Anderson Scholarship for Historic Preservation at our alma mater. Each year, the scholarship would support a student combining architecture and preservation, carrying forward Michael's passion for honoring the stories embedded in historic structures. The announcement of this scholarship generated an unexpected letter from Richard, Michael's father, who had remained largely silent throughout the legal proceedings. "While I cannot speak for my wife," he wrote, "I wish to express my personal regret for actions taken in grief that caused additional pain. The scholarship honors our son's values in a way I failed to do." Though brief and careful in its wording, the note suggested at least one member of the Anderson family had begun reflecting on their behavior. Perhaps the most surprising development in my journey was the friendship that gradually formed with Grace following her divorce from Andrew. Initially reaching out to return personal photos she had saved from Vivian's destruction, she became an unexpected ally and eventually a friend. "Being part of that family was suffocating," she confided during one of our occasional dinners. "Watching how they treated you after Michael died finally showed me what I was becoming by staying." Her perspective on the family dynamics proved invaluable to my healing process, helping me understand that their behavior reflected long-established patterns of control and exclusion rather than specific rejection of me. My relationship with Olivia deepened through the crucible of crisis. The friend who had unhesitatingly offered her couch during my darkest hours now had her own key to my home, dropping by regularly with takeout and insistence that I take breaks from work. "Michael would haunt me if I let you become a recluse," she would joke, dragging me to concerts or weekend hiking trips that gradually reintroduced joy and spontaneity into my life. Weekend trips with Olivia and the close-knit circle of friends who had stood by me became essential rituals of reconnection with the world beyond grief and legal battles. On a rainy Tuesday 6 months after the court ruling, I encountered Vivian unexpectedly at the supermarket. She stood frozen in the produce section as our eyes met, clearly contemplating escape. Instead of the anger or anxiety such meetings had previously triggered, I felt a strange calmness as I nodded acknowledgement before continuing my shopping. The power she had held over my emotional state had dissolved, replaced by something approaching pity for a woman whose controlling nature had cost her not only her relationship with her son during his life, but also her standing in the community she so valued. 2 weeks later, a thick envelope arrived containing a handwritten letter from Andrew. "After much reflection," he wrote, "I've begun therapy to address patterns in our family that I'm determined not to perpetuate. Our treatment of you after Michael's death exposed a toxic foundation I can no longer ignore." While his words couldn't erase the months of suffering his actions had caused, they affirmed my growing understanding that families are defined by choices and behavior rather than merely by blood or legal ties. This recognition helped me appreciate the family I had constructed around myself. Friends who had demonstrated love and loyalty when it mattered most, showing up with moving boxes, legal referrals, job leads, and shoulders to cry on. By the time spring arrived, I had established new traditions in the house while preserving meaningful connections to Michael. His architectural drawings remained framed on the walls, but I had rearranged furniture to better suit my current life. His clothing had been respectfully donated to a program supporting architecture students, while I kept select pieces with special memories. The home breathed differently now, still honoring our shared history while acknowledging my continuing story. When my parents finally managed to visit from abroad, seeing the house for the first time since the legal resolution, my father paused in the entryway, looking around with quiet assessment. "You've done what Michael would have wanted," he said simply. "You've made this place fully yours while keeping him present." His observation precisely articulated what I had intuitively worked toward during the healing process. The estate planning attorney who had helped me secure my own arrangements, a process I now recommended to everyone regardless of age or health, remarked that my case had become something of a teaching example in her practice. "Your experience has motivated dozens of couples to properly document their intentions," she told me. "Your willingness to share your story has likely prevented untold suffering for others." This unexpected impact gave meaning to the painful journey, transforming it from merely personal trauma to a cautionary tale with practical value for others. On difficult days, when grief resurfaced with unexpected intensity, I would visit the memorial garden, sitting beneath the Japanese maple with Michael's favorite architecture books, reading passages we had once discussed. These moments no longer felt like drowning in sorrow, but rather like conversations continuing across a different kind of distance. The greatest lesson I carried forward was the recognition of my own resilience. The woman who had stood shell-shocked on her own porch, watching strangers carry away her possessions, had discovered reservoirs of strength she never knew existed. That strength now informed every aspect of my life, from professional negotiations to personal boundaries, to a gradually reawakening sense of possibility for the future. Have you ever experienced betrayal from family during a time when you most needed support? Did you find strength you didn't know you had? Please share your stories in the comments below. If this journey of resilience and justice resonated with you, hit that subscribe button and like this video. Your support helps me continue sharing these difficult but important stories of overcoming life's most challenging moments. Remember that family is ultimately defined by love and respect, not merely by blood or legal ties. Thank you for accompanying me through this chapter of my story, and I wish you the strength to face whatever challenges life may bring your way.